Hey, amazing people. If you're subscribed, then you're a legend. Thank you so much. But most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please smash that sub button and join the family. I've done a lot of dumb things in my life, but agreeing to go on a blind date with a guy I barely knew, that's gotta be at the top of the list. Looking back now, I honestly can't believe I went through with it. I mean, the signs were there. I should have known something was off from the start. It all started when I matched with Daniel on one of those dating apps. We had a couple of decent conversations, nothing too wild, just your typical getting to know each other stuff. But then he sent me a message that threw me off. He said, "Hey, I think it would be fun if we brought something to show and tell on our date. Something to help us get to know each other better. What do you think?" At first, I thought it was a little strange, but I figured, hey, why not? It's something different, right? So I said sure and started thinking about what I could bring. I wasn't about to bring anything lame like a picture of my cat or my favorite book. That felt like such a rookie move. I thought about it for a while and then came up with a jar of random trinkets I've collected over the years. Little things I thought were interesting or had some meaning. Nothing too weird, but I figured it'd be cool to share. It seemed like the type of quirky thing that could get the conversation going. Fast forward to the actual date. We decided to meet up at a cozy little cafe, the kind where it's quiet enough to actually talk, but not too quiet where you feel like you're in a library. I got there first, and I sat down at one of the small tables near the window, trying to play it cool, but I couldn't shake this weird feeling. I guess it was the nerves kicking in. I mean, I was about to meet a guy I knew almost nothing about, and honestly, I wasn't sure if I was going to like him or if he liked me. He showed up about 10 minutes later, looking pretty normal. He was wearing a jacket and jeans, kind of like how a guy would dress for an average date. Nothing out of the ordinary. He smiled at me when he walked in, and I felt myself relax a little. We exchanged some small talk, the usual stuff. How's your day been? What do you do for fun? Blah, blah, blah. Then he got kind of quiet and pulled out a small opaque jar from his bag. Now, I've got to admit, I was intrigued. I thought maybe he was going to pull out some random collection of weird, vintage things like stamps or old coins. Something that would actually make sense in the context of show and tell. But when he placed the jar on the table, something about it felt off. It wasn't that the jar looked weird or anything. It was just a small, regular glass jar with a metal lid. But for some reason, my gut was telling me there was something very wrong about what he was about to reveal. And that's when he said it. He told me to take a guess. "Guess what's inside," he said, looking way too pleased with himself. He seemed so excited, but in a way that made my stomach drop. I stared at the jar for a second, unsure of what to even say. It didn't make sense. It was too small to be something serious, but the way he was acting made me think it wasn't just something silly either. I took a deep breath and shook my head. "I don't know, what is it?" That's when he twisted the lid out the jar and leaned in just a little closer. His eyes sparkled, and he whispered in a tone that made my skin crawl, "It's my lint collection." I blinked, trying to process what he just said. Lint? Like belly button fluff? I didn't know how to react. At first, I thought he was joking. Maybe it was some weird way to break the ice. But then, as I looked closer, I realized he wasn't joking. There, sitting at the bottom of the jar, was a mound of, well, I can only describe it as fuzz. It wasn't colorful or neat, and it wasn't organized in any way. Just random bits of fuzzy stuff, like the stuff that collects in the pockets of your coat or around the edges of your sleeves. The kind of thing you normally just flick off without a second thought. But he had collected it, all of it, and kept it in a jar. I was silent for a few seconds, staring at the jar. I had no idea what to say. How do you respond to something like that? But it was the way he was looking at me, waiting for a reaction, that threw me off even more. He was acting like this was a totally normal thing to do, like he thought I would be impressed or intrigued. I could feel my stomach turning. I didn't want to seem rude, but I couldn't help myself. I asked, Why you keep it?" It was a lame question, I know. What else could I ask? I was so confused. He leaned back in his chair, almost proud, and said, "I've been collecting it for years. You know, it's a way of keeping track of myself, my body. I thought it'd be fun to share it with you." I felt a rush of discomfort flood through me. My mouth went dry. The thought of his belly fluff, of all the random bits of lint from his body sitting in that jar, it was like something out of a nightmare, but somehow it was happening right in front of me. And he was acting like it was normal. I quickly tried to change the subject. I didn't want to be rude, but this was honestly one of the weirdest things I'd ever encountered. I picked up my drink, pretending to be interested in the coffee I'd ordered earlier, but my mind was racing. I was trying to figure out what the hell I was even doing there. The rest of the date went downhill after that. I tried to make small talk, but it felt like he was completely out of touch with reality. Every conversation just made me more uncomfortable. The whole time I kept thinking about that jar. The lint. I felt like I couldn't escape it. After what felt like hours, I made an excuse to leave. I didn't even wait for him to offer to walk me to my car. I just bolted. I didn't know if he was going to follow me or what, but I just needed to get away. When I got home, I immediately texted my best friend and told her everything. She didn't believe me at first, thought I was joking, but I swear to God, it wasn't a joke. That was the last time I ever went on a blind date. And looking back, I can't help but wonder, what the hell was in that jar? Was it just lint, or was it something else? I'll never know for sure. And honestly, I don't think I want to. I'll never forget that night. What seemed like the perfect date ended up being one of the most unsettling things to ever happen to me. I've told this story to a few friends, and they all agree it's freaky, but honestly, I still don't know how to process what happened. It's like my brain wants to forget it, but it keeps replaying over and over again. So, here's how it all went down. It started like any other date, honestly. I met Spence through a mutual friend. We had a couple of casual conversations over text before deciding to meet up. Nothing too special at first, just your typical, hey, let's grab dinner and see how it goes type of thing. He seemed cool enough, a little quiet, but I didn't mind. We went to this little Italian place downtown, and everything was going perfectly. He wasn't over the top, and he wasn't silent either. We laughed, had good conversations about movies and music. It felt like I'd known him for longer than just a couple of hours. After dinner, he suggested we drive around for a bit and grab some ice cream. I thought it was a nice, low-key way to end the night. The weather was perfect for a drive, and the city looked pretty under the streetlights. So we went to a small park by the river. The whole vibe was super chill, and I didn't think twice when he parked in a secluded spot. It was peaceful, and for a minute, it was just the two of us talking. Then, without warning, he leaned over and kissed me. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not some prude, and I wasn't opposed to it. The kiss felt nice, actually. Maybe it was the way he did it, or maybe it was the moonlight, but it just felt like the right moment. I kissed him back, but then things started to get weird. In the middle of the kiss, he pulled away just slightly and grabbed his phone from the dashboard. It was barely a second, but he held it up like he was about to take a picture. I was still processing what was happening, and before I could even ask what he was doing, he snapped a picture of us kissing. I was kind of taken aback. I mean, sure, it was a cute moment, but it felt a little off. He seemed totally casual about it, though, like this was just a normal thing to do. He looked at me and said, just want to keep a memory. I didn't think too much of it at the time. I mean, I've heard of couples doing that, right? Taking pictures when they're having a good time together. Still, it felt like he didn't quite respect the privacy of the moment, but I pushed the thought aside. Maybe I was just overthinking it. I wasn't trying to make a big deal out of something that could just be innocent. The kiss didn't last much longer after that. We sat in his car for a few minutes, just chatting, and eventually I decided it was time to head home. He drove me back to my place, and everything seemed fine. I got out of the car, said goodbye, and told him I had a good time. Then the next morning, I woke up to a notification on my phone. It was a message from one of my friends. She sent me a screenshot of Spence's Instagram story. I opened it, and my heart sank. There, right in the middle of his story, was a picture he took of us kissing the night before. He posted it with a caption that said, "Last night was fun, #good times, #memories, #first date." My stomach dropped, and I swear my face went pale. I didn't even know how to respond. My mind was racing. Why would he post something like that? Why would he tag me, of all people? I didn't even tell him I was okay with him sharing anything. That felt like something personal, something private. He didn't ask me, and it definitely didn't feel like just a memory to me. It felt like a violation of some kind. I immediately texted him, asking why he posted the picture. I wasn't angry at first, but I was definitely uncomfortable. I needed answers. I sat there for what felt like forever waiting for him to respond. When he finally did, His response was so casual, like I was the one overreacting. He basically said, I thought it would be nice to remember the night. You looked really cute. I thought we had a great time, so I shared it. I was livid, but I tried to stay calm. I told him that I wasn't comfortable with him posting something like that without asking me first. I mean, we weren't even a couple. It was a first date, for crying out loud. I didn't want my face plastered all over his social media just because we kissed. He apologized, but honestly, it felt half-hearted. It didn't sound like he was truly sorry for what he did. It felt more like he was sorry that I was calling him out on it. But the worst part came a few hours later. I got another notification. This time it was a text from a different friend of mine. She sent me a link to his Instagram profile and said, Dude, are you okay? This guy is going wild with these posts about you. I opened the link and my jaw nearly dropped. Not only had he posted the picture of us kissing, but he had posted several more different angles, different moments from the night. All with the same caption, like he was trying to create this timeline of our date. But the worst part was, he tagged me in every single one. I felt sick. He hadn't just posted that one picture, he had shared a whole bunch, as if he was documenting our relationship when there was nothing to document. I didn't even know this guy. We weren't a couple, we didn't even have a second date planned, and yet he was treating me like I was part of his social media persona. I immediately blocked him on everything. I didn't care if it seemed dramatic, I was done. I couldn't even wrap my head around what I just witnessed. It felt like he'd stolen something from me. That moment was mine, but somehow he had turned it into a public spectacle. I never spoke to him again, and I've never been on a blind date since. The whole thing left me so shaken. It wasn't just the fact that he posted the pictures. It was how casual he was about violating my privacy. I just couldn't get over how he didn't seem to understand why it was wrong. I still have the screenshots from his posts, and every now and then I go back and look at them. I can't help it, but it just doesn't sit right with me. It's a weird thing to be haunted by, but I think I'll carry that memory with me forever. Not just the date, but the realization that sometimes people cross boundaries in ways you never expect. You know how sometimes you think you're just going on a casual date, and then it spirals into something way weirder than you ever imagined. That's exactly what happened to me with Shiloh. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, honestly. It's one of those stories that feels like it's straight out of a horror movie, but I swear to you, it was all real. I'm not exaggerating. It all started when my parents decided I should meet Shiloh. She was the daughter of their good friends, and I had never really heard of her before. They were always talking about how great she was, how she was around my age, and how she'd recently moved back to town. My mom thought it would be great if we got together. I didn't think much of it. I'm the type who doesn't mind going on a blind date every now and then, even if it feels a little awkward. So I agreed. When I first met her, she seemed pretty normal. Attractive in that soft, unassuming way, with dark hair and a kind of shy smile. She wasn't super talkative, but she was friendly, and we got along well enough. It wasn't like those disastrous blind dates where the conversation is dry and you just want to escape. No, this was a decent dinner at a nice place. We talked about typical stuff at first. School, work, life in the city. Nothing weird. But then, as the night went on, something started to feel off. It wasn't something you could put your finger on immediately, but I could tell that Shiloh was a little more intense than I expected. It wasn't the way she talked, exactly. It was more like the way she looked at me. There was a weird pressure behind her eyes, like she was waiting for something. I didn't pay too much attention to it, but looking back, I think I should have. The first weird thing happened when we were getting ready to leave. She told me she was really glad we'd gone out and that she had a great time. Then she just blurted out that she thought we were perfect for each other and how happy she was that we had met. Okay, I'm not someone who jumps into relationships fast, and I definitely wasn't ready to go that route with someone I had just met, so I was a bit taken aback. I laughed it off and said I was glad we had a good time, but she just kept going. She asked me if I thought we could be more than just a date. Like she was already jumping ahead, talking about us being a couple. I wasn't really sure how to respond. I didn't want to be rude, but this was way too soon. I told her I wasn't really looking for anything serious at the moment, which honestly should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. We got in my car, and that's when things started getting really weird. As I was driving, she suddenly grabbed my arm and asked me, almost desperately, if I considered marrying her. Just like that. Out of nowhere. I thought she was joking at first. I mean, who does that on a first date? But no, she wasn't joking. Her eyes were wide, almost frantic. She kept repeating that we would make a great couple, and she felt so sure about it. I tried to be nice. I told her I wasn't ready for that, not with anyone, and especially not with someone I had just met. She just wouldn't stop, though. She said that she needed to get married soon and that she thought we could be happy together. I had no idea where this was coming from, but I was starting to feel trapped. It wasn't a let's take things slow and see where it goes situation anymore. It felt like she was forcing me into something. I couldn't get away fast enough. I told her I'd drop her off at home and that I needed to get some rest. She was still persistent, though. She said things like, "You'll see we'd be perfect together, and don't you feel it too?" I couldn't make sense of it, but I just wanted the night to be over. The next day, I tried to shake off the weirdness of it all. I figured it was just a misunderstanding, or maybe she had a lot of feelings for me and was just moving too fast. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about how she begged me to marry her. That was way outside the norm for any date I'd ever been on. But then things got even stranger. A few days later, my mom asked me how things had gone with Shiloh. I told her about the date and how weird it was at the end. But then my mom casually dropped a bombshell that made my blood run cold. She told me that Shiloh had been trying to get married to someone and that she was already pregnant. She said Shiloh had been desperate to find someone to marry her before anyone figured out the real story. The baby wasn't mine, of course, but it was clear that Shiloh had been hoping I'd fall into her plan. My mom didn't know the whole story, but she said that Shiloh had been telling everyone that she needed to get married quickly before anyone started putting the pieces together. Apparently, the whole town knew about it. She was hoping to cover it up by getting married fast and making it look like the baby was mine. That's when everything clicked. The desperation, the pressure to marry her. It wasn't because she liked me. It was because she had an agenda. I couldn't believe I'd gotten caught in the middle of whatever twisted plan she was cooking up. I felt sick. My mind was racing, but I had to keep my cool. I couldn't imagine what kind of mess I'd be in if I'd actually said yes. I never talked to Shiloh again after that. I didn't want to be involved in whatever drama was going on in her life. It didn't feel like she was looking for love. It felt like she was looking for a way out of her mess. A way to hide the truth from her family and friends. And I was supposed to be part of that cover-up. Looking back, I should have known something was off when she kept asking me about marriage so soon. But honestly, I thought I was just being a little paranoid. Now I know better. Some people don't want a relationship. They just want a way to manipulate things to fit their narrative. I'm just glad I didn't get tangled up in hers. That was my last blind date. I don't know if I'll ever go on another one, honestly. Some experiences just leave a mark, and this one definitely did. I never thought a simple blind date could turn into something that would mess with my head like this. Honestly, I still can't believe it even happened. I mean, you go on a date hoping to meet someone cool, maybe make a connection, and end the night with some nice memories, right? Yeah, not this time. If I'd known what I was walking into, I would have backed out before the whole thing even started. It started pretty normal. I had met Lisa through a mutual friend, someone who vouched for her, said she was sweet and easygoing, the kind of person you'd want to spend time with. At least that's what I thought. We'd been chatting for a while over text, and everything seemed fine. She seemed fun, maybe a little quirky, but nothing that set off any red flags. So we decided to meet at a little coffee shop downtown. It was this cozy place, not too crowded, perfect for getting to know each other. I showed it a little early just to make sure I wasn't late. I'm the type to be punctual, not really into making a bad impression. Anyway, when Lisa walked in, I almost didn't recognize her at first. She was exactly how she'd looked in the pictures, but she had this energy about her. She was smiling, but there was something off about her. Something I couldn't place right away, but it felt like there was a layer to her that I wasn't seeing. She came over and we exchanged a quick hug. Honestly, it was a little awkward, but nothing too weird. We grabbed our coffees, sat down, and started chatting. It was your usual first date stuff, talking about where we grew up, hobbies, whatever. She was talking a lot, which I didn't mind. I figured she was just nervous, and hey, that's normal on a first date. But after a little while, I started noticing these strange little things about her. First, she kept glancing at her purse. Not in a casual way, but like she was waiting for something. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe I was just overthinking. But then she pulled something out of her bag, and I had to do a double take. It was a knife. A freaking knife. I froze for a second, not sure if I was seeing things. She put it down on the table next to her coffee and just looked at it, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I didn't know what to do. I kept staring at it, but I didn't want to seem rude by calling attention to it. I mean, it wasn't exactly something you casually ask about, but Lisa didn't seem uncomfortable at all. She just smiled at me and said something that made my blood run cold. I brought this in case the date goes well. If we hit it off, I was hoping I could get a little of your blood. I'm not kidding. She said that, like it was a totally casual thing. At first, I thought she was joking, but the more I looked at her face, the more I realized she was dead serious. There was no hint of humor, no smirk. She was just looking at me like it was the most natural request in the world. Now I'm all for people being unique, but this was beyond anything I had ever heard. I didn't know what to say. I asked her, why would you want my blood? And she told me in this strangely calm tone that she wanted to make a necklace out of it. Yeah, you heard me right. A necklace. She said she had done it before, that she thought it was a special way of remembering someone. She went on about how it meant something deep, almost like a bond. She wasn't joking. She wasn't crazy laughing or acting out some weird fantasy. She looked me dead in the eyes, explaining that it was a personal ritual for her, a way of holding on to a piece of someone. I honestly didn't know how to react. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what she was saying. I looked at the knife, and all I could think was, I need to get out of here. But the problem was I was stuck. I didn't know how to just get up and leave without making a scene. I kept telling myself that maybe this was some weird, misguided joke. So I tried to keep the conversation going, hoping she'd drop it. But she wouldn't. She kept talking about it, how she had collected little bits from people she had dated in the past. She seemed almost proud of it, like it was this cute little hobby. She explained that she didn't want to hurt me, just a tiny drop of blood. It's a keepsake, she said. Nothing to be afraid of. That's when I realized there was no way I was going to be okay with this. I had to get out. I could feel my heart racing, and the whole room felt suffocating. I wasn't even thinking straight. I don't know what I expected to happen. Maybe I thought I could laugh it off, get up, and make some excuse. But my mind was already made up. I couldn't stay. I quickly made some excuse about needing to get home. I wasn't rude about it, but I wasn't sticking around for any more of that talk. I paid for the coffee, grabbed my stuff, and walked out. Lisa didn't seem upset, though. In fact, she almost seemed disappointed that I was leaving. But there was nothing I could do. I just couldn't be near her anymore. After I left, I didn't want to think about what had happened. I tried to tell myself I just misread the situation, or that maybe she was just super into some odd, dark fantasy. But it didn't sit right. Something about it gnawed at me. I tried to go on with my day, but I couldn't stop thinking about the knife and how calm she was when she said she wanted my blood. It was like she was talking about getting a coffee refill. Just too casual. I didn't talk to Lisa after that. I couldn't. I didn't want to, and I never wanted to hear from her again. I deleted her number, blocked her on social media, and moved on with my life, but it stayed with me. To this day, I can't shake the image of that knife on the table, the way she looked at me like I was just some piece of her collection. A small piece she could take with her. My advice? If you ever go on a blind date and someone pulls out a knife, run. Just get out of there as fast as you can. Trust me, it's not worth sticking around to find out what happens next. Let me tell you about the worst blind date I've ever had. It started off fine, normal, even. You know how it goes. A little nervous, wondering if it'll be awkward, hoping for the best. But what happened? Well, I'll be honest. It was a disaster from the moment we sat down, and it only got worse. So, I matched with Tal on a dating app. He seemed nice enough over text. He wasn't overly forward or weird, and he didn't send anything inappropriate, which, let's be real, is a rare thing on dating apps. We agreed to meet at this nice little place downtown. One of those cozy spots that looks fancy but doesn't cost a fortune. I wasn't expecting fireworks or anything, just hoping for a decent dinner and some good conversation. When I first saw him in the restaurant, I didn't immediately get a bad vibe. He was taller than I expected, kind of broad, and his outfit looked put together. But the second we started talking, I realized something was off. Like the way he talked about certain things, the way he looked at people, it just didn't sit right with me. I kept trying to brush it off. Maybe it was just first date nerves, but then came the waiter. He was this young guy, maybe in his early 20s, super friendly and polite. He came up to the table to take our drink orders, and everything seemed fine at first. But then Tom started giving him the coldest, most dismissive look I've ever seen. I thought maybe he was just annoyed about something, but it was like the waiter was invisible to him. I don't know how else to explain it. He snapped at him about the menu, then went on this weird rant about how the restaurant should offer better quality drinks. The waiter just nodded and apologized, but I could feel the tension in the air. I didn't want to say anything at first. I thought, okay, maybe he's just having a rough day, or maybe he's one of those people who's hard to impress. But then when the waiter came back to bring our drinks, Tom acted like he didn't even notice him. The guy set the drinks down, and Tom barely even acknowledged it. Instead, he just started going off about how slow everything was and how it shouldn't take so long to bring a glass of water. And the worst part, he raised his voice. Not like a little irritated. He was seriously loud, and I could see people at nearby tables starting to look over. The waiter apologized again, his face red now, clearly uncomfortable. But Tom wasn't having it. He started making sarcastic comments about the restaurant's service and even brought up how he could get better service at a fast food joint. At this point, I was mortified. I kept trying to make eye contact with the waiter, but he was too focused on Tom to notice. I wanted to tell Tom to calm down, but I didn't want to make things worse. So I just sat there, not knowing what to do. It got even worse when we ordered food. The waiter accidentally brought Tom's dish with a minor mistake. It wasn't anything huge, just a small tweak in the sauce. But Tom flipped. He literally raised his voice and started arguing with the waiter about how it was unacceptable to mess up an order. The waiter apologized a million times, but it wasn't enough for Tom. He demanded to speak to the manager. He got so worked up. I actually thought the manager was going to come out and have to break up a fight. And here's the thing. I could see the waiter wasn't handling it well. His hands were shaking as he tried to take the plate back. He looked like he was about to cry, but he was still trying to stay professional, trying to fix the mistake. But Tom wasn't backing down. The whole thing felt like it was spiraling, and I was trapped at the table with this guy who clearly didn't care about anyone else but himself. At that point, I was done. I didn't care how the night was supposed to go. I couldn't sit there and watch this poor waiter get chewed out for something so stupid. But I didn't know how to get out of it without making the situation even worse. Finally, the manager came over to the table. She was calm, trying to smooth things over, but Tom wasn't having it. He was still shouting about how this was unacceptable and how he'd never come back to a place that treated their customers this way. The manager apologized again, offered to comp our meal, but Tom just wasn't letting up. He demanded a free dessert, and when she told him that wasn't possible, he just kept going. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't make it obvious. When the manager left, I tried to steer the conversation in a different direction, but Tom just kept talking about how bad the service was. He wasn't even trying to be nice anymore. He was being genuinely cruel. It was like he was enjoying how uncomfortable everyone around him was. I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. Good as that. Eventually, the dinner was over, and I paid for my part of the meal. Not that I was going to let him pay for me after that scene. I was relieved to leave, honestly. As we walked out, he had the nerve to complain that the whole night was ruined because of the shoddy service. He didn't even seem to care about how badly he had treated that waiter. It didn't even seem like he thought he had done anything wrong. On the way out, he tried to make some small talk, asking if I wanted to hang out again sometime. I couldn't even respond. I just nodded and said, maybe, but I knew there was no way I was ever seeing him again. That night, I got home and felt completely drained. I was replaying the whole thing over and over in my head. I've been on a few bad dates before, but nothing like this. It was one of those situations where you just feel sick because you know you're never going to be able to forget what you saw. Tom had acted like an absolute jerk, and it was like he didn't even care. It made me realize how some people just have no respect for others, and they think they can get away with anything just because they're in a bad mood or having a rough day. I blocked his number as soon as I got home. He never texted me again, and I was honestly relieved. The waiter, though, I'll never forget how he looked when he brought the food back to the kitchen. I'm sure he was just doing his job, but I could tell it had to have been a really bad night for him. And as for Tom, I'm glad I'll never have to deal with someone like him again. So yeah, that was my blind date horror story. If you ever end up on a date and someone is being rude to the staff like that, trust your gut and get out as soon as you can. It's never going to get better, and honestly, you don't want to be around that kind of energy. I don't know what made me go through with it, honestly. Maybe I was curious or maybe I was just bored. Either way, when I got that message from the girl I'd been talking to on the dating app, I had a weird feeling from the start. But I pushed it aside because, hey, I didn't want to be that guy who backs out after a few messages. We had been texting for a week and everything seemed fine. She was a bit quirky, but in a fun way, like one of those people who says random, funny things that make you laugh without even trying. Her name was Hannah. She told me she loved going to this hole-in-the-wall cafe downtown that served the best coffee. So I thought, why not? I figured it was a low-pressure spot. Nothing too fancy, just two people meeting for the first time. When I showed up, I didn't see her right away. I scanned the place. It wasn't super busy, but it wasn't empty either. I figured maybe she was running late, or maybe she had stepped outside for a second. So I sat at one of the small tables by the window, checking my phone and scrolling through random stuff while I waited. I kept wondering if this would be awkward. It always feels weird meeting someone for the first time, especially when you've only seen their profile pic. About 5 minutes later, a girl walked in. She had brown hair, the kind that falls in messy waves, and she was wearing a denim jacket that looked like it had been worn a lot. Definitely not anything flashy, which made her look approachable. I stood up when I saw her, ready to introduce myself, but she didn't even look at me. Instead, she walked straight to the counter and ordered a coffee. I didn't think much of it, assuming she was just in her own little world. But then something caught me off guard. She didn't seem to recognize me. I mean, we'd been texting for a week, so I figured she'd at least look my way and give me a hey or a wave or something. But she didn't. She just stood there waiting for her coffee like she was in no rush. I stood there for a few seconds, wondering if I should say something. I didn't want to look like a creep just standing there, but I also didn't want to mess up the first impression. Eventually, I just decided to go up to her. And I said, she looked up, her face completely blank. Hi, I'm Mark. We've been texting for a while. She smiled awkwardly, almost like she was confused. It wasn't a big smile, just a little half smirk, and then she nodded. Right, yeah, I remember now. Sorry, I was just lost in thought. She didn't seem super confident when she said that. It felt off, but I let it slide. I figured maybe she was just shy. We'd been texting for a bit, but sometimes people don't match the vibe from their messages in person, you know? So we sat down, but the more I talked to her, the weirder things got. I tried to bring up the texts we'd shared, funny stuff, casual chat. Like, I told her about this embarrassing thing that happened to me at work, and she didn't remember any of it. I figured it was just a lapse in memory. Maybe she had a lot on her mind. But then, as I went through a couple more things we talked about, she just stared at me. Not in a normal way, but like she was struggling to catch up with what I was saying. She didn't even try to laugh at the stuff that I knew we joked about. It was as if she'd never read those messages. I got the distinct feeling she wasn't the person I'd been texting at all. But how could that be? We talked about personal stuff, things only we would know. Wait, I said after a while, feeling more confused. You don't remember talking about that weird dream I had last week? She blinked, her face blank. No, she said slowly, like she was trying to force herself to remember but couldn't. I guess not. At this point, the red flags were waving in my face, but I didn't want it to be rude. Maybe I had the wrong person. Maybe Anna had just lost track of some of our combos. So I said, trying to keep things casual, what's your job again? You told me you work at a bookshop. Her eyes flickered. I don't. I work at a clothing store, she replied, her voice quieter now. She seemed like she was thinking hard, but the answer was off. Something about the way she said it didn't add up. I tried to laugh it off. Right, yeah, my bad. I must have mixed you up with someone else. But the longer I sat there, the more uncomfortable I became. This wasn't adding up. This wasn't the girl I'd been texting. There was no way. Finally, she looked at me like she was about to say something important, but before she could, I couldn't help it. I had to ask. Who are you? I blurted out. You're not the Anna I've been texting. She blinked, then her face softened. I know, she said quietly. I've been dining alone, actually. But when you came over, I don't know, it felt right. Like I felt like you were the one I was supposed to be with tonight. Her voice was soft, almost pleading. I felt like I should say something, but the words wouldn't come. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to feel. I was shocked, confused, and honestly a little freaked out. I stood up, feeling like the air around us had thickened. Look, I'm sorry, but I don't think this is going to work. I said, not even sure if I was making sense. But as I turned to leave, she reached out to touch my arm. Her hand was cold, too cold. I didn't want to be alone tonight, she whispered, her voice almost too quiet to hear. I just wanted to feel loved. I didn't know what to say. I left the cafe, my mind racing. I didn't even bother looking back. Something wasn't right, and I wasn't going to stick around to figure out what it was. I still don't know who she was or what the hell happened that night. But I've learned one thing for sure sometimes: trust your gut, even when you think it's just nerves. Because that night, it was nerves. Something else was going on. Something I wasn't ready for. I'm still not sure what happened that night. I'm not even sure what I'm supposed to think about it. I went on a blind date with a guy named Germain. He was nice enough, I guess, but things got weird, really weird. Looking back, I should have left way earlier, but for some reason, I just kept telling myself it would get better. Spoiler, it didn't. So it all started with this dating app I signed up for. I wasn't really expecting much. I'd been swiping through profiles for a while when I saw Germain's. He had this calm vibe about him, and his profile didn't seem sketchy. Just some basic pictures, a couple of sentences about his job and hobbies. He seemed okay, nothing out of the ordinary. We started chatting, and the conversation was pretty chill, so I agreed to meet in for coffee at a little cafe downtown. Nothing too fancy, just a casual first date. I got there first a little early because I always like to get a feel for the place. It was a small, cozy spot. Nothing special, but it had a nice vibe to it. I found a seat by the window and started checking my phone, waiting for him to show up. Germain walked in about 10 minutes later. He was okay. Not exactly what I expected, but not in a bad way. He was on the taller side, with messy hair and a laid-back style, wearing a hoodie and jeans. But there was something about him that felt off right away. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was there. He came over to me and I smiled. "Hey," I said, standing up to greet him. He didn't smile back, just nodded and sat down across from me. His eyes were a little too intense, like he was scanning everything around us. I figured maybe he was just nervous, so I didn't think too much of it. We started talking, but right away I noticed something odd. He was talking really quietly, like so quietly I had to lean in to hear him. It was weird. At first, I thought maybe he was shy, but he kept going. "Do you want to get some coffee?" I asked, trying to break the ice. He looked at me and whispered, "No, I don't trust the coffee here. There might be something in it. Chemicals." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I just nodded. "Okay, no coffee. How about a tea then?" He shook his head. "The tea's fine, but it's better if we don't speak too loudly." At that point, I was starting to get confused. I thought maybe he was just being quirky. Maybe he was into some weird conspiracy stuff, and I'd have to listen to a few outlandish theories. People are weird. It didn't help that his voice was so soft, and he kept looking around the room as if he was worried someone might be watching us. I got my tea, and we kept talking. But the more we talked, the more strange things got. He kept whispering, his voice so quiet that I almost had to read his lips at one point. He was talking about bugs. Bugs? I asked, not sure if I had heard him right. "Hidden bugs," he said. "They're everywhere. You can't trust people. You can't trust anything. They put bugs in places, they spy on you. You have to be careful what you say." I didn't know what to say. I figured he must have been joking, but there was no smile. No laugh. Just this serious look in his eyes, like he was dead set on what he was saying. I started feeling uncomfortable. Why was he whispering so much? Why was he being so paranoid? I tried to steer the conversation in a different direction, talking about music or the weather or something, anything to make it feel normal. But it didn't work. Every time I spoke, he would whisper even lower, his eyes darting around the cafe like he was expecting someone to jump out at him at any moment. And then he said something that really sent me into panic mode. He leaned across the table, his face way too close to mine, and whispered in a voice so low I could barely hear it, "You're being watched right now." I froze. What? I didn't even know how to react. I just stared at him, thinking maybe he was messing around. But he wasn't laughing. His face was completely serious, his eyes wide with this weird intensity. I'm not gonna lie, I felt a little trapped at that point. I didn't know how to escape without being rude. But this guy, he was freaky. His paranoia was escalating and I didn't know how to calm it down. Every time I tried to change the subject, He just kept bringing it back to bugs, to spine, to how everything around us was dangerous. The worst part was how he kept glancing over his shoulder, every few seconds, like he was checking if someone was sneaking up behind us. At one point, he got up to go to the bathroom, and when he came back, he checked under the table and around the room. It wasn't normal. None of this was normal. But I stayed, mostly because I didn't know how to end it. I didn't want to make things worse. And I guess a part of me thought maybe this was just a weird first date thing, and it'd blow over. It didn't. By the time we finished our drinks, I was itching to leave. Tremaine was still acting paranoid, whispering about them and how the government was probably tracking us. My skin felt prickly, like something was wrong, like I was being pulled into a situation that was escalating way too fast. When I stood up to leave, he grabbed my wrist. It was tight, but not painful, just enough to make me uncomfortable. "You don't have to leave," he whispered, his eyes wide. "You're safe here. They won't get us here. But you need to stay quiet." I didn't know what to say. I just wanted to get out of there. I didn't care how weird it seemed. I was about to sit there and get sucked into whatever nightmare was happening in his head. I pulled my wrist away from his grip and made my excuses. "Look, I'm sorry, but I think I've got to go," I said, standing up. His face dropped. He looked hurt. "Please," he whispered, barely audible. "I don't want to be alone." I didn't know how to respond to that, but I turned and walked out of the cafe as quickly as I could. I never heard from Jermaine again, and I don't think I ever want to. I don't know if he was just socially awkward or if he had some deeper issues going on, but that night, it was the strangest, most uncomfortable date I've ever been on. And I'm pretty sure I'll never forget how paranoid he looked when he whispered about the bugs. I never thought a simple blind date would end up like this. I mean, I've heard the horror stories, some bad dates, some awkward moments, but never anything like this. And what's crazy is, at first, everything seemed totally normal. But somehow, out of nowhere, it all came crashing down, and it all started with Shania. We met through a mutual friend. I wasn't really looking for anything serious, but I figured I'd give it a shot. Shania was cute, and from our messages, she seemed cool, funny, just one of those easygoing people. So after talking for a couple of days, we decided to meet up for dinner at a place I'd been wanting to try. Nothing too fancy, just a little food joint on the corner, cozy but not overly expensive. When I saw her walk in, I'll be honest, I was relieved. You know how sometimes people look different in person, or like the pictures are edited or whatever. That wasn't the case. Shania looked exactly like her photos, big bright smile, and her eyes were the kind of warm that just made you feel comfortable. The date went really well. We laughed a lot, talked about all the usual stuff, work, friends, random stories. She seemed down to earth, but also super funny. I had a good time. I honestly thought we were hitting it off. After dinner, we went for a walk around the neighborhood, grabbed some ice cream, and just chilled for a while. It was like one of those perfect casual dates where everything just clicks. No red flags, no weird vibes, nothing off. When I dropped her off, I gave her a hug, and we both agreed to text later. Everything felt fine. In fact, I felt I was going to see her again soon, maybe even try something more serious. So, a couple of weeks pass. We keep texting here and there, but nothing out of the ordinary. Then one afternoon, things completely flipped on me. I was at home just watching TV and having a lazy day when there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so when I opened it, I was shocked to see two uniformed police officers standing there. They asked me if I was Mark, and I said yeah, and then they introduced themselves. They didn't say much at first, just asked if they could come inside and talk. I had no clue what was going on, but I let them in. They told me they were investigating an assault case and that there were allegations against me. To say I was floored would be an understatement. I just stood there staring at them, completely confused. Assault? What the hell? I asked them who was accusing me, and they told me it was a woman named Shania. That's when it all hit me like a ton of bricks. Shania? A girl I'd been on a date with. They didn't give me many details at first, just that she'd made a statement and said something happened between us on our date. I was dumbfounded. I couldn't even process what they were saying. Why would she accuse me of something like that? We'd only gone on one date, and like I said, everything went fine. Nothing even remotely sketchy had happened. The officers asked if I'd been in contact with her recently, and I told them we'd texted a few times, but nothing weird. I kept telling them that I had no idea what this was about, but they seemed to take it seriously. They asked me to come down to the station and give a statement. I agreed, of course, because at this point, I didn't know what else to do. I went to the station with them, and they asked me a bunch of questions about the date. They asked where we went, what we talked about, if I'd been drinking, if I touched her inappropriately, if I'd done anything to make her uncomfortable. It was a lot of questions. I was getting more and more frustrated because all I could think was, why is this happening? They told me that Shania had gone to them claiming that I had assaulted her during the date. It didn't get into specifics at first, but she said that I'd forced myself on her, and that she had only gone along with it because she was scared. I couldn't believe it. I had no clue what she was talking about. It felt like a nightmare. I explained every detail of the night, how we had dinner, laughed, and hung out like two normal people. I told them we hadn't even kissed, let alone anything else. But the more I told them, the more I could see they weren't just brushing it off. They were taking it seriously. I kept asking myself, what did she think she was doing? I had no history of this kind of thing, and I could tell by the way they were questioning me that they weren't letting this slide easily. It made me feel like they were already assuming I was guilty. I left the station that night feeling like I was in some kind of twisted dream. The whole thing just kept replaying in my head. Why would Shania do this? Why would she make up something like that? I mean, we had a good time on the date, right? I couldn't wrap my mind around it. The next few days were a blur. I talked to a lawyer, and we started putting together the pieces of what was going on. I realized I needed to get some kind of proof that I hadn't done anything wrong. I texted a couple of friends who were with me the night I went on the date, hoping they could back up my story. That's when I got a message from Shania. It was a simple text at first, asking if I was okay. I didn't reply. She sent a couple more, but I didn't answer those either. She didn't seem to be panicking, which struck me as odd. If I were her, I'd be freaking out about what I'd done. But the thing that got me was this one message she sent, a few days after the police visit. I didn't mean for it to go this far, but it's done now, sorry. That was it. It was like everything clicked. I started to realize she had set me up. She was trying to pull a fast one. The cops had no idea it was a lie until I found out. It was almost like she had thought I wouldn't fight back, like I just let it slide. When everything finally came to light, Shania's story fell apart. It turned out she had made it all up, and for reasons I still don't fully understand. It seemed like she thought it would get her something, attention, sympathy, or maybe just a way to get revenge for something I hadn't even done. The charges were dropped, and the whole thing was forgotten, except for me. Now, whenever I think back to that date, I wonder how the hell I didn't see the signs. Maybe I was just too trusting, but I never thought something like this could happen to me. This happened a few months ago, and I still don't know what to think about it. I went on this blind date with a guy named John, and everything was going pretty well at first. We met at this little cafe downtown, and things started out normal enough. I mean, we were talking, getting to know each other, and it felt pretty casual, but then he said something that made my stomach drop. And the more we talked, the more I realized he wasn't exactly who I thought he was. John seemed like a nice guy when we first started talking online. His profile wasn't anything crazy, just the usual stuff. Likes, dislikes, some random photos from trips he'd taken, a few goofy selfies. He didn't seem like a red flag kind of person at all. We hit it off pretty quickly in our messages, and after a few days of chatting, I agreed to meet him for coffee. I wasn't expecting much, honestly. I didn't go into it thinking this was going to be the date of my life. But you never really know. We met at this cute little spot, one of those places where they have a million kinds of coffee and a bunch of fancy teas. I got there first and grabbed a table out a window. I always like to get to places early just in case. It's easier to take in the vibe of the place, and if the person doesn't show, I can just dip without it being too awkward. But when John walked in, I was kind of surprised. He was tall, taller than I expected, and well-dressed, but there was this intensity in his eyes. He smiled, but it was a little forced, like he was trying to overcompensate for something. I got up and we hugged. It wasn't weird or anything. He seemed like an all-right guy at first. We ordered, sat down, and started talking. The conversation flowed naturally, and we had a few laughs. But then, out of nowhere, he said something that caught me off guard. He mentioned his parents, how they'd gotten divorced when he was younger. That's not unusual to hear on a first date. A lot of people have some sort of family history that comes up. But what he said next really made me pause. John told me that his parents' divorce had been really tough for him, and that it changed the way he viewed marriage. So far, this wasn't exactly anything to raise alarms about, but then he told me that he never wanted to get divorced himself. He was serious about it, like really serious. At first, I thought it was kind of sweet, like he really believed in the sanctity of marriage and didn't want to go through the same heartbreak his parents had gone through. But then he kept talking, and I started to get uncomfortable. He said that when he got married, he would make his future wife sign a legal document that would make it impossible for her to divorce him for any reason. I stared at him for a second, not sure if I had heard him correctly. I figured maybe I misunderstood. Maybe he meant it as some sort of joke. But no, he kept going. He told me that this document would legally bind his wife to their marriage, and if she tried to divorce him, she would face severe penalties. It wasn't a joke. He was dead serious. I didn't know what to say. My brain was scrambling to make sense of what he was saying. I wanted to laugh it off, but there was something about the way he was talking, so calm and matter of fact, that made it impossible to just dismiss it. It was like he had thought about this a lot, like this wasn't some offhand comment. It felt planned, almost calculated. As we continued talking, I started to pick up on more red flags. John didn't seem to care about the idea of compromise in a relationship. To him, marriage was about control. He was so set on making sure his wife couldn't leave him. I asked him if he thought that was a bit extreme, and he just shrugged it off like it was nothing. He said that when you really loved someone, you did what you had to do to make sure you stayed together no matter what. I tried to steer the conversation in a different direction, but it was like a switch had flipped in him. He kept going on about how divorce rates were higher than ever and how people didn't take vows seriously anymore. And every time he mentioned his future wife, it was always in terms of ownership, like he was trying to own the relationship. He didn't seem to see it as two people coming together to build something equal. To him, it was about making sure she couldn't ever leave. At that point, I was starting to feel trapped. I had no idea how to get out of this conversation. I didn't want to be rude, but I definitely didn't want to sit there listening to this guy talk about controlling his future wife. I mean, who says something like that on a first date? I kept telling myself that maybe I was misreading the situation, that maybe he wasn't as bad as I was making him out to be. But everything he said was starting to feel more and more off. We finished our drinks, and he suggested we go for a walk in the park nearby. I agreed, but I was already thinking about how I was going to end the date. I didn't feel comfortable anymore. The whole thing was starting to make my skin crawl. While we were walking, he kept talking about the document. He even told me that when he got married, he was going to make sure the woman signed the contract before the ceremony, like it would be part of the wedding vows. I don't know why, but that really stuck with me. The idea that he thought it was normal to have a legal contract that basically forced a woman to stay with him. It was disturbing. I didn't say much. I just kept nodding and trying to act normal, but inside I was panicking. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how I could politely wrap this up and get out of there. By the time we got back to his car, I felt like I had to get away from him. He seemed nice enough, but there was something really off about how obsessed he was with control, and I knew then that I definitely didn't want to see him again. I told him I had a busy day ahead and had to go. He seemed fine with that, but as I got into my car and drove away, I had just dodged a huge bullet. That conversation stayed with me for days. I don't know what his deal was, but honestly, I can't even imagine what kind of relationship he was expecting to have with that mindset. I'm just glad I didn't end up in a situation where I'd be legally bound to someone who thought that way. And now, every time I go on a date, I always wonder if that's the kind of person I could be dealing with. It's a weird feeling knowing that some people think control in a relationship is okay. I never heard from John again, and to be honest, I'm kind of relieved. That date was definitely one I'll never forget. This happened a couple of months ago, and honestly, I'm still not sure if it was some bizarre prank or if I was actually the victim of a really messed up situation. I went on a blind date with this girl named Sana, and let me tell you, it was nothing like I expected. We met through a mutual friend, nothing too crazy, just one of those, hey, I think you two would get along situations. I looked at her profile, and she seemed pretty cool, had a good sense of humor into the same kind of movies I was, seemed like someone I could actually talk to. She was also really cute, which didn't hurt. We exchanged a few messages, and after some back and forth, we decided to meet up for dinner at a local diner. Nothing fancy, just some good food and a chance to chat in person. The day of the date, I was honestly kind of excited. I'm not one to get nervous or anything, but I was looking forward to seeing if the chemistry we had online would translate in real life. So I get to the diner early just in case and find a seat by the window. It's a chill spot, low key, so I figured it'd be a good place to have a first date. When Sana walked in, I didn't know what to expect. But when she waved at me and sat down, I could tell right away that she was different from the pictures. She was still cute, but there was something a little off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I just felt like something wasn't quite right. She sat down and we started talking. Everything seemed fine at first. She asked me about my day, I asked about hers. Pretty normal stuff. And then, after about 5 minutes of conversation, she just suddenly shouted, like not like a loud voice, but it was as if she just screamed without any warning. And she didn't just yell once. It kept happening. She'd say something, and then, out of nowhere, she'd just shout, "Leon," or "show," at the top of her lungs. It was like the most random words possible, and they were coming out of her mouth with no real reason. I'll admit, I didn't know what to do at first. Was she playing some weird joke on me? Was she messing with me? I mean, this wasn't what I had imagined for a first date. I wasn't sure if it was some kind of bizarre icebreaker, or if maybe she had some condition, so I kept my cool and tried to just roll with it. I asked her if everything was okay, and that's when she told me she had Tourette's. She said she had it for years and that it was a part of her life. At that point, I wasn't sure if I should feel bad or if I was supposed to be more understanding, so I just nodded and tried to ignore the constant outbursts. The thing is, it wasn't just one or two words randomly shouted. She was literally yelling every few minutes. She'd be talking about something, and then boom, another random scream. I honestly didn't know if I should leave or keep sitting there and pretend it was normal. I mean, imagine trying to have a casual conversation, and every couple of seconds, you're interrupted by someone yelling the weirdest things. Turtle, Pete and Sile, BLOD. I tried to focus on the conversation, but after a while, I was just sitting there wide-eyed, feeling like I was losing my mind. I kept trying to be polite, so I'd laugh it off or nod along, but deep down, I was starting to get seriously uncomfortable. It felt so out of place, like there was no way this could be real. It felt like I was in some kind of twisted comedy sketch. I mean, how could anyone act like this in a public place? It kept going for the entire dinner. I could barely get a word in without being interrupted by another loud shout. I'm not even kidding, it was like every minute she'd yell some random word or phrase. I could see the people around us looking over, clearly uncomfortable. I don't even know if I looked uncomfortable or if I was just frozen in shock. And then, just as I was about to lose my patience, she paused for a second, looked at me, and said, "Okay, I bet you now it's just a joke." I was absolutely stunned. Like, I honestly thought I didn't hear her right. I was half expecting her to burst out laughing and say, "Gotcha." But no, she just sat there, sipping her drink like it was the most casual thing in the world. She told me that she'd been messing with me the whole time, that she didn't have Tourette's at all. It was all just for fun. She thought it would be hilarious to pretend she had Tourette's and to see how I'd react. I couldn't even process it. My brain was just trying to catch up. All of the shouting, the bizarre outbursts, the weird tension in the air. It was all a joke? I mean, that was messed up. I felt like I had just been dragged into this weird, uncomfortable prank. And the worst part was, it wasn't even funny. It was honestly just kind of cruel. I don't even remember what I said to her after that. I think I just sat there looking at her in disbelief. I was angry, confused, and honestly, just kind of disgusted. She didn't even apologize. She seemed genuinely surprised that I wasn't laughing along with her. She just shrugged it off and said, "It's no big deal, right?" I didn't stick around much longer after that. I paid the bill, said something like, "I'm good, thanks," and walked out. I don't think I've ever been that weirded out by a date in my life. I mean, yeah, sometimes dates don't go as planned, but I didn't expect to be manipulated into thinking I was with someone who had a serious medical condition, only to find out it was all some kind of weird joke. I didn't talk to her again after that night. I blocked her on everything and just moved on. But honestly, I still think about that night sometimes. How messed up it was to pull something like that on someone who doesn't even know you. It wasn't funny, it wasn't clever. It was just cruel. If you're going to go on a blind date, just know there are some people out there who think messing with someone's head is a good time. And whatever happened to just having a normal dinner, huh? I'll be honest, I'd never expected my first blind date to take such a weird turn. I mean, when you hear the words blind date, you're not exactly thinking about the gym, right? But here we are, I'm still not sure what part of this date was the most messed up. It started out normal enough. I met Donald on this dating app, and we talked for a bit before deciding to meet up in person. Honestly, he seemed like a decent guy in his messages. He was funny, a little shy, and into fitness, which, okay, I'm not a gym junkie myself, but I thought it could be a good way to get to know him. So we agreed to meet at a gym near my place. I know it's a weird spot for a first date, but we were both into fitness, so it didn't seem completely out of left field. He said he'd show me some new exercises, maybe work through a few routines together. I was down for that because it sounded fun and casual. Plus, I was thinking if we didn't click, at least we could just go our separate ways and not have to suffer through a dinner that felt awkward. When I got to the gym, Donald was already there. He waved from across the room, and I waved back, feeling pretty good about the whole thing. He looked exactly like his profile pictures, tall, fit, and not overly intimidating. He smiled, and we exchanged a quick, "Hey, how's it going?" before he suggested we get started with some weights. At first, everything seemed fine. We were just warming up, talking about the usual things, work, how we like to spend our weekends, whatever. It felt pretty natural, and I didn't feel like there was any weird pressure. Then he asked if I wanted to spot him while he did some bench presses. I thought, sure, I've done that before at the gym, so no big deal. Now, I'm not a personal trainer or anything, but I know enough about weights to know that when someone is asking you to spot them, they're usually lifting something they can't handle alone. I figured that was the case with Donald. He looked like he was gearing up for a heavy set, but when he laid down on the bench and grabbed the bar, I immediately noticed something. He didn't look like he was handling the weight very well. His form was off, and the bar was wobbling more than it should have been. It looked like he was struggling, but he didn't say anything about needing help. So I thought maybe he just needed a little assistance. I stood there, ready to give him the spot he'd asked for, but as he started pressing the bar, it became clear that he was struggling much more than he let on. The bar was going down way slower than usual, and I could see his arms shaking a little. He was clearly failing at the weight, but instead of calling it quits, he kept pushing through it. I knew something was off, so without thinking, I reached forward to help him with the bar. Just a light touch, nothing major. And that's when everything flipped. Donald suddenly screamed at me to back off. I'm not talking about a low-raised voice or a stern "I got this." No, he full-on shouted, and his face turned red. He yelled at me for touching the bar, even though I wasn't pulling any weight, just making sure it didn't fall on him. It was still out of nowhere that I froze. I didn't know if I'd misheard him or if he was joking, but he wasn't laughing. His face was twisted with anger, and I just stood there, unsure of what the hell was going on. He kept going on about how I shouldn't have touched the bar, how I needed to respect the process and that he could do it on his own. He was breathing heavily, clearly still struggling with the weight, but now I was the one who was scared. I mean, what do you do in that situation? I'd only touched the bar to keep it from falling on him, and now I was the bad guy. I took a step back, not sure if I should just leave or stay and try to smooth things over. I was already feeling awkward, but his reaction was seriously off. Instead of calming down, he just kept ranting, telling me how disrespectful it was to interfere when he hadn't asked for help. I could see other people in the gym glancing over at us, and I felt my face get hot with embarrassment. This was not the vibe I signed up for. At that point, I didn't even want to stay and finish the set. I was already regretting agreeing to spot him, but now I was just hoping he'd finish up and we could go our separate ways. But no, he pushed the weight up one last time and immediately got up from the bench, still breathing heavily. His expression didn't soften at all. He stood there for a second, looking me up and down like I was the one who just ruined the entire workout. I couldn't even look him in the eyes anymore. I just felt humiliated. After a few moments of awkward silence, he casually told me that we should do something else, like maybe go for a run or something. But the thing is, I didn't even want to be around him anymore. I didn't want to run or talk or do anything. I was so thrown off by how quickly everything had escalated from casual to confrontational. I said I was going to head out, and Donald didn't even try to stop me. He just nodded, still clearly upset, but I didn't care anymore. I grabbed my stuff and practically ran out of there. I'm not proud of it, but I was so shaken, I didn't even say goodbye. I just wanted to get out of that gym and away from him as fast as possible. Later, I got a message from him, something about how he didn't mean to come off as aggressive and how he was just really passionate about his workouts. But honestly, I didn't respond. I didn't need any explanation or excuse for what happened. I just felt completely disrespected, and I wasn't interested in hearing him out. Looking back on it, I still can't believe it. The date went from 0 to 100 way too fast, and all because of the barbell. I mean, I've been on some bad dates, but nothing compared to that. It was like his temper flared for no reason, and it wasn't even about the weights. It was about control, about his need to dominate the situation, and honestly, I wasn't going to stick around for that. Anyway, yeah, my first blind date turned into a full-blown nightmare, and I don't think I'll ever agree to go to the gym for a first date again. Who knows what would have happened if I'd stayed longer. I've been on a few awkward dates in my life, but nothing that even comes close to the disaster that happened with Sharon. I still can't believe it went down the way it did, and honestly, I don't think I'll ever be able to look at a restaurant table the same way again. This story might sound a bit crazy, but I swear to you it happened. And to this day, it's one of the most disturbing things I've ever experienced. It all started with a typical blind date situation. We met on a dating app, nothing special, just one of those let's see what happens types. Her profile seemed decent enough. Sharon had a good smile, seemed laid back, and we shared some common interests. We started chatting, and everything was going pretty smoothly. So after a week or so of messages, we decided to meet up in person. We agreed on a casual dinner at a local restaurant. Nothing too fancy, just some Italian food and the usual first date stuff. Getting to know each other, talking about our jobs, our lives, all that jazz. I showed up at the restaurant first, grabbed a table for two, and waited. I was excited, but honestly, I was a little nervous too. First dates always give me that weird mix of anticipation and dread. Anyway, Sharon arrived about 15 minutes later, and she was pretty cute. A little taller than I expected from her photos, but definitely not a deal breaker. We said our hellos, and she sat down. The first part of the date was fine, or at least I thought it was. We talked about the usual stuff, what we do for work, some of our hobbies, favorite movies, the typical getting to know you stuff. I won't say it was an instant connection, but it wasn't awkward either. Sharon was polite and seemed to be enjoying herself, until she wasn't. After about half an hour, I noticed she started acting a little weird. At first, it wasn't too noticeable, just a little fidgeting, shifting in her seat, and looking down at her phone every couple of minutes. I thought maybe she was just checking in with a friend or something. I didn't think much of it. Then, out of nowhere, she stopped mid-sentence, put her fork down, and said she was feeling really uncomfortable. It wasn't dramatic, I can't do this kind of uncomfortable, but more like she was unsettled, like something was wrong physically. She told me she needed a minute, so I just sat there, awkwardly watching her shift around in her seat, clearly not herself. I figured maybe she had a stomach ache or something. It happens, right? I was about to ask if she wanted to leave or go to the restroom to freshen up, but before I could, she reached down under the table and started fumbling with her clothes. I wasn't sure what she was doing at first. Then, to my utter shock, she pulled out a tampon. Yes, a tampon from her insides. She looked at me deadpan and said, "Oh, that's why I feel so uncomfortable. I forgot to take it out earlier." She casually set it down on the table right there, next to her half-eaten pasta, like it was no big deal. And there it was, sitting in the middle of the table for me to stare at. I froze. My brain couldn't even process what had just happened. I'm talking full on what in the hell kind of freeze. I didn't know how to react. Was this some sort of joke? Was she testing me? Or was this just her? The whole situation was like a car wreck. I couldn't look away, but I didn't know how to handle it. She didn't seem fazed at all. In fact, she went right back to her food like nothing had happened. I was sitting there in total shock, staring at the tampon on the table, trying to figure out if this was an actual situation or some kind of sick prank. I won't lie, I was grossed out, man. I mean, it was already weird enough that she just pulled it out in front of me, but to just set it there on the table where we were eating. No way. It was like something out of a nightmare, something that shouldn't happen in real life. I had no idea what to do. I felt my stomach turning a little, but I didn't want to be rude. I didn't want to call her out on it or make a scene, but at the same time, I really wanted to get up and leave. I sat there for a minute just trying to keep it together. I felt like I was losing my mind, sitting at a dinner table with someone who just casually put their used tampon on the table. What do you even say to that? How do you react when something like that happens? I started to question my entire existence. How had I gotten myself into this? After what felt like an eternity, she finally noticed my discomfort. She kind of laughed and said it was no big deal, that she just forgot about it, and she'd been feeling uncomfortable all evening because of it. I wanted to scream. I didn't know whether I should be mad, grossed out, or just leave. It wasn't even about the tampon itself. It was the complete lack of awareness she had about the situation. She wasn't embarrassed. She didn't seem to care that I was sitting there, a complete stranger, staring at this piece of medical waste on the table while she nonchalantly continued eating her food. There was no apology, no excuse, nothing. Just a half-hearted, oh, it's fine, as if this was a normal thing to do on a date. At that point, I couldn't handle it anymore. I told her I wasn't feeling great and I should probably head out. She just nodded like it was a normal thing to say, and we both got up, paid the bill, which I was honestly ready to cover just to get out of there, and I walked out of the restaurant as fast as I could. Once I got outside, I took a deep breath and just stood there for a minute. I was so disturbed by what had happened that I wasn't sure what to think. I've been on bad dates before, but that was next level. I don't even know how to describe it. The whole thing just felt wrong. I blocked her number as soon as I got home. I couldn't even bring myself to text her, not that I had anything nice to say. That was the worst blind date I've ever had. I don't think I'll ever be able to get that image of a tampon on a dinner table out of my head. Honestly, I don't even know how she thought that was okay. I mean, who does that? And who thinks that's a normal thing to do? I didn't expect much from my blind date with Simon, but I also didn't expect to be so thrown off by someone I barely knew. I'm not saying I'm picky when it comes to dates, but I had a pretty decent idea of what I was hoping for. A chill time, maybe some good conversation, and honestly, just to see if we could vibe. What I got instead? Well, let's just say I learned a lot in the span of one really weird night. We met on a dating app, nothing special. His profile seemed fine. He was into the usual things: sports, hanging out with friends, the occasional weekend getaway. Typical stuff. He had a solid picture or two, looked like someone I might get along with. After chatting a bit, we decided on meeting at a local bar that had a pool table. I figured it would be a fun way to break the ice, you know. A little friendly competition, a little banter. Should have been simple. So I show up at the bar a little early and there's Simon, already waiting by the pool table. I could tell right away that he wasn't the most outgoing guy. He looked a bit reserved, maybe a little nervous, but I figured, hey, first dates can do that to people. No big deal. He smiled, said hello, and we ordered some drinks before heading over to the table. At first, things seemed normal. He asked if I played pool, and I said I wasn't great at it, but could hold my own. No biggie. I didn't think it would be a serious game or anything. But right from the start, things got weird. He started setting up the game, and instead of offering to play together or maybe teaching me a few moves, he just started hitting the balls by himself. I watched him for a bit, not really sure if I was supposed to be involved. He didn't ask if I wanted to take a turn or even acknowledge that I was standing there, just lining up shots and sinking balls one after another. It was awkward, to say the least. I waited for him to make eye contact or at least say something like, "Hey, your turn." But nope, he just kept playing, ignoring me completely. I sat there, sipping my drink, unsure of what to do. I didn't want to be rude, but it was quickly becoming obvious that he had zero interest in letting me play. I could feel my patience starting to wear thin. The whole point of going to the pool table was to play together, right? Not for him to hog it for an entire hour. I was getting pretty frustrated, but I tried to keep it cool. Maybe he just didn't know how to start the game or was nervous, I thought. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of him running the table by himself, Simon looked over at me, wiped his hands on his pants, and casually asked if I was ready to play. At that point, I just felt annoyed. Not because I wanted to win or anything, but because he just wasted an hour of my time. I wasn't mad at the game itself, I was mad because he made zero effort to make this date feel like a date. I felt like I was just there for him to do his own thing, and I was getting nothing out of it. But whatever. I wasn't about to make a scene, so I grabbed the cue stick and decided to give it a shot. I wasn't terrible, but I'm also not some pool shark. I had fun with it, even though I wasn't great. But Simon, well, he didn't take too kindly to that. Every time I missed a shot, literally every single time, I could feel his eyes on me like he was judging me. And then he started making these little sarcastic comments under his breath. I couldn't tell if he was trying to be funny or just being a jerk, but it didn't sit well with me. I felt like I was being judged for something that wasn't even important. It was just a game. Finally, after I missed a shot again, Simon just stopped, leaned back against the table, and asked if I've ever even played pool before. I didn't answer at first. I just didn't feel like engaging with his weird, passive-aggressive tone. But he wasn't done. He started going on about how people who can't play pool have no real skill, and that I probably wasn't good at anything if I couldn't even sink a simple shot. Now, at this point, I'm over it. I'm starting to wonder how this guy had made it to a date without anyone else already walking out. But then Simon pulls something out of left field that I wasn't expecting at all. He looks at me with a smirk on his face and says, "So, now that we've been playing for a while, how about you get lucky with me?" He didn't even say it in a joking way. It was almost like he just expected it. I froze. I was so taken aback by the question that I didn't even know how to respond. It wasn't like we had been flirting or giving each other any signs that we were even remotely close to kissing, let alone anything more. It was just awkward, weird small talk up until then. But he didn't stop there. He started to make it sound like it was my fault for not giving him a kiss. He said I was just angry because I sucked at pool and wasn't having fun. I couldn't believe it. I literally just met this guy, and he was trying to guilt trip me into something so weird and uncomfortable. I couldn't handle it anymore. I stood up, grabbed my purse, and made an excuse about having to leave early. Simon just sat there, watching me go like it was no big deal. As I walked out of the bar, I was just in complete disbelief. What had just happened? Was that actually a date? Was I really being made to feel bad about not being good at pool and then pressured into something I didn't want? I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I blocked his number as soon as I got home, and I never heard from him again. Honestly, I'm not sure what he expected from me, but I know one thing for sure. I'll never be going on a date where pool is involved again. It was just a weird, uncomfortable, and honestly kind of embarrassing experience. And I'm not about to let anyone like Simon make me feel like crap again. I'm not exactly the kind of guy who gets catfished. I mean, I like to think I've got a good head on my shoulders and can tell when something seems off. But man, the date I had with Dina was not what I expected at all. It was supposed to be a fresh start with someone new, but instead, I ended up with a twisted blast from my past. So, here's the deal. I matched with Dina on one of those dating apps a few weeks ago. Her profile was cute, nothing over the top, just normal stuff. Likes hiking, movies, going out for coffee. We chatted for a bit, and she seemed chill. The pictures she had up looked decent too, not like some overly edited selfies that you see from time to time. But even though I felt like I was talking to someone normal, something about it didn't sit right with me. I mean, why hadn't I heard from her in a while, even though we'd been messaging regularly? I figured she was just busy, but there was this nagging feeling in the back of my mind. A few days later, she messaged me and suggested we meet up for coffee. I was up for it. Why not, right? I didn't think much of it, and we set the time and place. I showed a little early, grabbed a table, and waited. I'll be honest, I was excited to meet her. It'd been a while since I'd gone on a date that wasn't with someone I already knew, and she seemed like a cool person to hang out with. But then she walked in, and when I saw her, my stomach dropped. She was, well, not exactly the Dina I thought I was talking to. She wasn't ugly, but she looked different, way different. Her hair was a lot shorter than the picture, and her face was much rounder. I could tell she was nervous too, but I didn't think much of it at first. I mean, who wouldn't be nervous on a first date, right? But then it hit me. This wasn't the girl I'd been texting. Not at all. I tried to brush it off, but I knew something was off. She came over to the table, sat down, and immediately started apologizing for how she looked. She explained that she'd been having a rough time lately, and I was like, okay, I get it. Life happens. But the whole thing just felt wrong. She was acting a bit too apologetic, like she was trying to explain away her appearance, and it was all just a little too rehearsed. At first, I thought maybe the guy was being a little harsh. Maybe it was just my own insecurity or something. But the more we talked, the weirder it got. She kept saying things that didn't make sense, like how she used to go to the same places I used to visit when we were still together, even though I didn't remember her ever being into those things. Then she kept bringing up all these little details about our past relationship that I had completely forgotten. Things I definitely didn't tell her about. I was starting to get more and more confused. And then, without warning, she hit me with something that made my blood run cold. She said she wanted to get back together. I didn't know how to react. I was completely floored. I hadn't seen Dina in months. And when we broke up, it was pretty clear that things weren't working. Why would she even want to try again? And then it hit me, this was Dina, just not the one I remembered. She had been catfishing me this whole time. The Dina I had been talking to, the one who looked like she was living her best life in those pictures, wasn't the real person. The girl sitting in front of me had made herself into someone else. For a second, I didn't know what to do. I was so stunned that I just sat there, blinking at her like an idiot. It felt like I was caught in some twisted, messed up dream. And then she kept going on about how she'd missed me, how she'd made a mistake when we broke up, and how she really wanted us to work things out. It wasn't until a few minutes later that it really hit me. She had literally spent all this time pretending to be someone else to get me back into her life. And what scared me the most was the fact that she seemed like she genuinely believed it was a good idea. She seemed so calm, so collected, like it was totally fine to lie about who she was just to get me back. The worst part, she wasn't even apologetic about the whole thing. She didn't even acknowledge that what she'd done was messed up. She just acted like it was normal, like she could just pull this whole thing off without any consequences. The next few minutes were intense. I had no idea what to say. I felt violated, honestly. Like someone had invaded my life and twisted it into something I didn't recognize. It wasn't even about how she looked. Hell, that wasn't the issue at all. It was the fact that she had deliberately misled me from the start, pretending to be someone else, all so she could worm her way back into my life. I couldn't handle it. I just couldn't. I felt trapped. Here was this person, someone who used to mean something to me, sitting across from me, acting like she hadn't just completely messed with my head. But then I had to snap out of it. I knew I had to leave. I got up, told her I wasn't interested in getting back together, and that what she'd done was messed up. I didn't want to sit there and listen to her try to justify it. She just sat there quiet, staring at me with this, I don't know, like a mix of anger and disappointment in her eyes, like she wasn't even sorry. I walked out of that cafe feeling like I was in a fog. I didn't know what I just experienced, but I knew one thing: I would never be trusting anyone online again. It's crazy how easy it is for people to pretend to be someone else, and what scared me the most was how well she did it. That was my last blind date with anyone from a dating app. And honestly, I don't think I'll ever go back to it again. You just never know who's really on the other side of the screen. I never thought I'd be in a situation like that. When I agreed to go on a date with Carl, I didn't expect anything crazy, just a normal date. I met him on a dating app, and he seemed fine. Decent profile, okay conversation, nothing too weird. But as it turns out, things went in a direction I absolutely did not expect. It's still a bit messed up thinking about it now. We decided to meet at a local cafe. It wasn't anything fancy, just a casual spot where you can grab a coffee and chill. He was a little late, which wasn't a big deal, but I could tell right off the bat that something was off. He didn't apologize or really explain. He just sort of slid into the seat across from me and smiled. At first, I tried not to judge. Maybe he was running late. Maybe he was just one of those people who didn't really make a big deal out of being punctual. But the more we talked, the more I realized something was off. We got into small talk, the usual stuff. What do you do? What are your hobbies? Etc. He seemed like a normal guy, but the vibe was a bit heavy. It wasn't even that he was rude or dismissive, but he had this air about him that was hard to pin down. I started to get this feeling that maybe he wasn't as normal as he seemed. About 20 minutes into the date, I decided to joke around. I mean, it was supposed to be fun, right? So I asked him why he didn't bring me any flowers or a gift, like I wasn't expecting anything big or fancy, but it's a classic joke for a first date. Something lighthearted. But instead of laughing, he just looked at me for a second and said something that threw me off completely. He said that gifts meant you'd done something wrong, that giving gifts is a way of apologizing for something you've done. I didn't know how to respond at first. I mean, I laughed awkwardly and tried to brush it off, but that comment just hung there between us. It wasn't a joke anymore. He said it with such seriousness, almost like he was trying to explain his whole philosophy on life or something, like it was some deep truth that I was supposed to understand. The thing was, it wasn't a normal way to think about gifts or gestures, especially on a date. He was talking like it was a huge red flag to give someone a present, like it was tied to guilt or obligation. It was so weird, but I didn't want to be rude, so I just let it slide and tried to change the subject. But in the back of my mind, I was thinking, why would anyone think that way? As the date went on, Carl was just off. The conversation kept dipping into uncomfortable territory. Every time we touch on something lighthearted, he makes some weird comment that made it feel like there was an underlying tension. Like he was waiting for me to ask the wrong question or say the wrong thing so he could drop another bizarre statement. He mentioned how he didn't really like the idea of needing people. He said he preferred to keep people at arm's length and that relationships were overrated. This wasn't just some I like my space thing. It was more like he actively seemed to dislike the idea of being close to anyone. He made it clear that if someone needed him for anything, emotionally or for support, he'd find that exhausting, and that, I guess, was normal for him. By the time we finished our drinks, I was feeling so uncomfortable, but I didn't want to make a scene. I mean, this was a blind date after all. I thought, maybe I'm just reading too much into this. Maybe I was overreacting. But something in his eyes, the way he looked at me, felt almost predatory. He wasn't doing anything overtly weird, but I started to get the sense that he was analyzing me, sizing me up in a way that didn't feel right. I tried to laugh it off again, making some comment about how it's always fun to meet new people and that this had been interesting. But he didn't smile. He didn't even acknowledge the attempt at humor. Instead, he started talking about how he doesn't trust most people. He went on and on about how people are inherently untrustworthy, and that's why he keeps everyone at arm's length. By then, I was just trying to get through it. I wanted to be polite, and I was seriously starting to regret this whole thing. He was making me feel weird, like I was in some kind of therapy session I didn't sign up for. It didn't help that his whole tone was so matter of fact, like he was giving me some kind of life lesson that I didn't ask for. I glanced around the cafe, hoping for some distraction, anything. But of course, the place was packed, and the only thing I could hear was Carl's monotone voice, droning on about how gifts were a sign of guilt and how he wasn't about to give me anything out of obligation. The last straw for me was when we started talking about relationships again. He got super serious about it and said, I don't believe in the whole we're in this together thing. I think it's just a way of controlling people. I was done. I couldn't take any more. That comment was so off the rails that it made me start thinking about getting up and leaving right then and there. I'd barely gotten up to grab my things when he said, almost as an afterthought, You're probably just upset because I'm not playing along with your games. And that was it. I couldn't do it anymore. I had to leave. I didn't care if it was rude. I just couldn't sit there and let him manipulate the situation. I grabbed my bag and made a quick exit, telling him I had to leave early. He didn't stop me, didn't even try to argue. He just gave me this weird, cold stare like he expected me to come crawling back. I haven't heard from him since, and honestly, I'm fine with that. I'm just glad I made it out of that date without any more weirdness. The whole thing still bothers me, though. That weird mindset he had, like he couldn't grasp the concept of just being nice without expecting something in return. It was like he was trying to manipulate the whole situation without me even realizing it. It's safe to say I'll be a lot more cautious next time I go on a date. This whole thing started out like any other blind date, but it ended up so much worse than I ever imagined. I met Bobby through a dating app, and to be honest, he seemed cool at first. We had exchanged some messages and the conversation flowed pretty easily. He wasn't overly forward or creepy, and I was honestly just looking for someone to hang out with. We decided to meet up at a local coffee shop. Nothing fancy. I wasn't expecting anything big, just a chill afternoon to get to know each other better. The date started off fine, nothing to write home about, but Bobby seemed nice enough. He was a little on the quiet side, but that didn't bother me too much. He asked a lot of questions about me, which was kind of refreshing since most guys I've been out with are always talking about themselves. He was polite, he smiled a lot, and he had decent manners. But as the day went on, there were little things that started to make me uncomfortable. For one, he kept looking at me like he was studying me. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it felt like he was really intense about everything I said or did. Maybe I was overthinking it, but every time I took a sip of my coffee, he watched me. Every time I made a joke or laughed, he focused on me like I was some kind of test subject. The conversation was okay, though. We talked about work, life, our favorite movies. Nothing too deep or intimate. But something about him felt off. Maybe it was the way he stared just a bit too long, or how he seemed so interested in the little details of my life. Like he was trying to memorize everything I said. I didn't really mind, though. At first, it was a coffee date. Things didn't need to be amazing. But then, after about an hour, Bobby suggested we take a walk. At first, I wasn't sure about it, but the weather was nice and I didn't want to seem rude, so I agreed. We walked around the area for a bit. It was a pretty busy street with a few shops and restaurants, so there were lots of people around. Nothing seemed off until we got to the park. There it was quieter, fewer people, and just the occasional jogger or a couple passing by. We sat on a bench and talked for a little while longer. I noticed, though, that Bobby was getting more intense, like he kept edging closer and closer to me on the bench. It was subtle at first, but by the time we were talking about random things, I was a little freaked out. He was telling me about his job, but his eyes were locked on me, not even looking around. He didn't blink much, and I started feeling like he wasn't really listening to what I was saying. More like he was studying me. That's the best way I can describe it. I started getting the feeling that maybe I wasn't the only one on this date. He seemed a little too interested, a little too focused on me. Eventually, I decided I had enough of the park. I wasn't really feeling it anymore. I wasn't into the vibe, and it felt like Bobby was crossing some personal boundaries. I told him I needed to get home soon, that I had an early morning. He seemed disappointed but nodded, not really pushing me. We walked back to my car, and I told him goodbye, feeling relieved that the date was almost over. Here's where it gets weird. As I drove away from the parking lot, it felt like I was being watched, but I didn't think much of it. I mean, there are a lot of people out there, right? Maybe it was just my nerves from the date. I kept checking my rearview mirror, but nothing was there. But then I turned onto my street, and I noticed something strange. I saw a car that looked like Bobby's parked a couple of houses down from mine. I didn't think it was him at first. I figured it was a coincidence, right? Maybe he lived in the area or something. But then, as I pulled into my driveway, I saw the same car follow me. It slowed down as I turned in, and I instantly felt the anxiety creep up my spine. I tried to ignore it at first. I went inside, locked the door, and turned on the TV to distract myself. I was trying to convince myself I was just being paranoid. But then, about 20 minutes later, I heard a car door slam outside. I peered out the window, but I couldn't see anything clearly. My heart started racing. I had this terrible feeling in my gut. That car from earlier was still there, parked on the street, and now someone was walking toward my house. I went to my phone, checking for any messages from Bobby, but there was nothing. No text. No call. I felt uneasy. Then the worst part, the sound of footsteps. Someone was standing outside my window. I couldn't see who it was, but I could hear their breathing, slow and steady, like they were waiting for me to do something. I didn't know what to do. Should I call the cops? Should I go outside? But I didn't feel safe. I kept the lights off, trying to stay as quiet as possible. I waited, hoping they'd go away, but they didn't. I stood there, glued to the window, watching the figure shift outside. Then slowly, the person started to walk away. I kept my eyes locked on them, just in case they turned back around. As they reached the end of the block, I saw the familiar car start up again, and I realized that it was Bobby's car all along. He was watching me. He had been following me for who knows how long. I don't know how long he stayed there, just outside my house, watching. But I do know this, I haven't heard from him since. I haven't gone on a date since, and every time I get in my car, I check the rear view mirror, just in case. I don't even know where to start with this one, honestly. It was supposed to be a casual hangout, nothing serious. Just a group of friends going out to get some food and drinks, a nice low-key night. But somehow, it ended up being one of the most awkward and uncomfortable experiences I've ever had. So, here's the backstory. I had mutual friends with this girl, Tasha. We'd seen each other around a few times, but we weren't close. We had talked a couple of times at parties and whatnot, but that was about it. Anyway, one day, some of our mutual friends set up this group dinner at a pretty chill restaurant downtown. The plan was to grab a bite, talk, and have a laugh. Nothing special. At the time, I wasn't really thinking much about Tasha or anything like that. She seemed cool enough when I talked to her in passing. The thing about Tasha was that she had, let's just say, a more full-figured body. I don't want to go into too much detail about it, but she wasn't the typical Instagram model type. That shouldn't have mattered, and I didn't think about it much, but it seemed to be something that some of the people around me couldn't stop mentioning, especially my friend Eric. I don't know why, but that night it was like he couldn't stop making jokes about her size. And I'm not talking about the kind of friendly, harmless teasing you might get away with if everyone's in on it. No, he was being pretty harsh, and I'm not proud to admit that I joined in. Eric started making these offhand comments while we were all eating, the typical stuff. Making fun of the way she ordered her food, commenting on how much she was eating, even cracking jokes about how she was going to need a second plate soon. At first, I was just awkwardly laughing along, but it quickly got worse. As the night went on, I could feel it getting more uncomfortable. Eric kept making fun of her, but now it wasn't just him. A couple of the others joined in, and I didn't stop them. I mean, I didn't exactly add to the jokes, but I didn't shut them down either. I was sitting there with the others, half laughing, half feeling bad, but I didn't want to be the guy who called out his friends. I should have been better, but in the moment, I just didn't do anything to stop it. Then came the part that made the entire evening unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. After some time, Tasha started to get quieter and quieter. I noticed she wasn't laughing along with the group anymore, and she wasn't engaging in the conversation like she had earlier. You could tell something was bothering her, but I didn't think it was because of the jokes at first. I figured she was just having an off night. But as the night went on, it became obvious. Her face was flushed, and she wasn't even looking at anyone. She was fiddling with her phone, not really part of the group anymore. It wasn't until later that I realized she was probably just trying to avoid the conversations, maybe even trying to figure out a way to leave without drawing attention. At some point, the group decided to go out for drinks after dinner. By now, Tasha had barely said a word for the last 20 minutes. I could see she was upset, but I didn't want to draw attention to it. I thought maybe it'd be better if I just left her alone. But then, out of nowhere, she stood up, grabbed her bag, and made an excuse to leave. I honestly thought she'd just had enough and was going home. I mean, it was getting late, and everyone was either tipsy or getting tired. But no one really cared enough to stop her. They just watched her go, and that was it. The next morning, I woke up to a message from Tasha. My stomach sank when I read it. She'd sent me a long message, and at first, I figured it was just going to be some kind of casual, hey, no hard feelings text. But it wasn't. She went on to say that she'd heard every single joke we made. She had overheard all of it, and to be honest, I don't even remember all of the things that were said. I didn't realize how badly it had affected her until I saw that message. It was like a punch to the gut. I didn't even know how to respond at first. Part of me wanted to apologize, to admit that I should have stepped up and said something. But another part of me was so embarrassed about what had happened, I didn't know how to face it. How do you apologize for something like that? I did a part of it, even though I didn't lead the jokes. Still, I should have been better. But what came next really shook me. Tasha posted a message on social media, and I could tell from the tone of it that she was hurt, but she didn't go into details. She just said that she wasn't going to put up with people treating her like that anymore, and that she was done with toxic people in her life. I guess she must have been talking about the dinner and everything that went down. The thing is, Tasha's post went viral in our circle of friends. People started commenting, and some even sent me messages calling me out. One by one, people who I thought were my friends started messaging me, telling me how messed up I was for letting those jokes slide. Some of them even admitted that they had been uncomfortable with the way we treated Tasha, but they didn't say anything because they didn't want to be the odd one out. It was a wake-up call for me. It was like everything I thought was normal, everything I thought was harmless was suddenly in my face, and it felt awful. I couldn't take it back. I had hurt someone who didn't deserve it, and I never really realized how much the comments affected her until she opened up about it. That night, everything felt different. My friends weren't the same, and I wasn't the same. The guilt weighed on me. I didn't expect to lose friends over something like this, but I should have known better. I should have done better. Now I avoid jokes like that. And if I ever find myself in that situation again, I'll make sure to speak up. I won't stay quiet. Tasha deserved more than what I gave her that night, and I'll never forget how badly I messed up. I don't even know where to start with this one, honestly. It was supposed to be a casual hangout, nothing serious. Just a group of friends going out to get some food and drinks, a nice low-key night. But somehow, it ended up being one of the most awkward and uncomfortable experiences I've ever had. So, here's the backstory. I had mutual friends with this girl, Tasha. We'd seen each other around a few times, but we weren't close. We had talked a couple of times at parties and whatnot, but that was about it. Anyway, one day, some of our mutual friends set up this group dinner at a pretty chill restaurant downtown. The plan was to grab a bite, talk, and have a laugh. Nothing special. At the time, I wasn't really thinking much about Tasha or anything like that. She seemed cool enough when I talked to her in passing. The thing about Tasha was that she had, let's just say, a more full-figured body. I don't want to go into too much detail about it, but she wasn't the typical Instagram model type. That shouldn't have mattered, and I didn't think about it much, but it seemed to be something that some of the people around me couldn't stop mentioning, especially my friend Eric. I don't know why, but that night it was like he couldn't stop making jokes about her size. And I'm not talking about the kind of friendly, harmless teasing you might get away with if everyone's in on it. No, he was being pretty harsh, and I'm not proud to admit that I joined in. Eric started making these offhand comments while we were all eating, the typical stuff. Making fun of the way she ordered her food, commenting on how much she was eating, even cracking jokes about how she was going to need a second plate soon. At first, I was just awkwardly laughing along, but it quickly got worse. As the night went on, I could feel it getting more uncomfortable. Eric kept making fun of her, but now it wasn't just him. A couple of the others joined in, and I didn't stop them. I mean, I didn't exactly add to the jokes, but I didn't shut them down either. I was sitting there with the others, half laughing, half feeling bad, but I didn't want to be the guy who called out his friends. I should have been better, but in the moment, I just didn't do anything to stop it. Then came the part that made the entire evening unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. After some time, Tasha started to get quieter and quieter. I noticed she wasn't laughing along with the group anymore, and she wasn't engaging in the conversation like she had earlier. You could tell something was bothering her, but I didn't think it was because of the jokes at first. I figured she was just having an off night. But as the night went on, it became obvious. Her face was flushed, and she wasn't even looking at anyone. She was fiddling with her phone, not really part of the group anymore. It wasn't until later that I realized she was probably just trying to avoid the conversations, maybe even trying to figure out a way to leave without drawing attention. At some point, the group decided to go out for drinks after dinner. By now, Tasha had barely said a word for the last 20 minutes. I could see she was upset, but I didn't want to draw attention to it. I thought maybe it'd be better if I just left her alone. But then, out of nowhere, she stood up, grabbed her bag, and made an excuse to leave. I honestly thought she'd just had enough and was going home. I mean, it was getting late, and everyone was either tipsy or getting tired. But no one really cared enough to stop her. They just watched her go, and that was it. The next morning, I woke up to a message from Tasha. My stomach sank when I read it. She'd sent me a long message, and at first, I figured it was just going to be some kind of casual, hey, no hard feelings text. But it wasn't. She went on to say that she'd heard every single joke we made. She had overheard all of it, and to be honest, I don't even remember all of the things that were said. I didn't realize how badly it had affected her until I saw that message. It was like a punch to the gut. I didn't even know how to respond at first. Part of me wanted to apologize, to admit that I should have stepped up and said something. But another part of me was so embarrassed about what had happened, I didn't know how to face it. How do you apologize for something like that? I had been a part of it, even though I didn't lead the jokes. Still, I should have been better. But what came next really shook me. Tasha posted a message on social media, and I could tell from the tone of it that she was hurt, but she didn't go into details. She just said that she wasn't going to put up with people treating her like that anymore, and that she was done with toxic people in her life. I guess she must have been talking about the dinner and everything that went down. The thing is, Tasha's post went viral in our circle of friends. People started commenting, and some even sent me messages calling me out. One by one, people who I thought were my friends started messaging me, telling me how messed up I was for letting those jokes slide. Some of them even admitted that they had been uncomfortable with the way we treated Tasha, but they didn't say anything because they didn't want to be the odd one out. It was a wake-up call for me. It was like everything I thought was normal, everything I thought was harmless was suddenly in my face, and it felt awful. I couldn't take it back. I had hurt someone who didn't deserve it, and I never really realized how much the comments affected her until she opened up about it. That night, everything felt different. My friends weren't the same, and I wasn't the same. The guilt weighed on me. I didn't expect to lose friends over something like this, but I should have known better. I should have done better. Now I avoid jokes like that. And if I ever find myself in that situation again, I'll make sure to speak up. I won't stay quiet. Tasha deserved more than what I gave her that night, and I'll never forget how badly I messed up. All right, I got a pretty wild story for you. I still don't really know how to process it all. It was one of those blind dates that sounded like it could be fun, but ended up going in a direction I definitely wasn't prepared for. And to be honest, it was one of those moments where I was totally taken by surprise, and I still don't know what to make of it. So here's how it all went down. I met Laura on one of those dating apps, nothing special. We exchanged a few messages, and she seemed cool enough. She was witty, had a good sense of humor, and we both liked the same kind of music. I wasn't expecting anything too serious, but I figured why not give it a shot. You know, a casual meetup and see where it went. We decided to meet at a coffee shop downtown, the kind of place with the dim lighting and hipster vibes. I got there first, grabbed a table at a window, and started scrolling through my phone. I was about 10 minutes early, but I figured no big deal. I was kind of nervous, but I've been on enough dates to know the drill. You talk for a bit, maybe have a couple of laughs, and just enjoy the time. Then I saw her walking toward me. She was a bit taller than I expected, but that didn't really register in the moment. I stood up, gave a little wave, and she walked over, smiling like she was excited to meet me. We exchanged pleasantries, I pulled out the chair for her, and we got into the usual small talk. I was trying to be myself, asking questions, keeping the conversation light. But honestly, something felt a little off from the beginning, and I couldn't put my finger on it. Laura's voice was kind of deep, but I just thought maybe it was just her tone. I've met women who have a deeper voice before, so it didn't seem like a huge deal. She sat down, and we both ordered our drinks. I went for an iced latte, and she ordered something that sounded super fancy, something with a long name I couldn't even pronounce. I guess it was one of those things where she was trying to show she was different, but I didn't mind. People do that. So we carried on. But here's the thing, as we talked, I kept noticing these little things that felt odd, like the way she moved or how she held her coffee cup. It wasn't that she was off, per se, but I was starting to get a weird vibe. It was almost like she was performing, like she was trying too hard to appear like she belonged in this situation, or maybe like she was pretending to be someone she wasn't. At one point, she made a joke about not looking like her pictures, and I thought it was just self-deprecating humor. But when I glanced over at her face, I realized she looked different from her photos in a way I hadn't noticed at first. It was subtle, but I couldn't deny it. Her features were slightly more angular than I had expected. There was a sharpness to them that I hadn't seen in the pictures. I told myself I was overthinking it, that maybe I was just reading too much into things. As the date went on, we fell into more comfortable conversation. We joked about a few random things and laughed at bad puns, but something inside me just wasn't sitting right. I don't know if it was the odd little movements, the deep voice, or the way she kept adjusting her jacket every so often, but there was this nagging feeling. It felt like I was having a conversation with someone who wasn't exactly who they seemed to be. I didn't know if I was being paranoid or if I was just being stupid, but I had this overwhelming gut feeling that something wasn't right. Finally, after what seemed like a never-ending string of awkward silences and forced laughter, I had to ask myself, what the hell is going on here? And then came the moment. We had finished our drinks, and Laura leaned in a little closer. She looked me in the eyes and said, "I've got to tell you something." Now I didn't think much of it. I mean, she seemed like the type to make a dramatic reveal. Maybe she had a weird job or was secretly married or something like that. But then she said something that completely knocked the wind out of me. "I'm not exactly who you think I am." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Laura took a deep breath and looked around the room. It felt like she was stalling, like she was trying to prepare me for something. My heart rate started picking up. What was she talking about? Was this some weird, cringy confession where she was about to tell me she was a catfish or something? Then she said, "I'm actually a guy." At first, I thought she was joking. I mean, who says something like that on a date? It didn't make sense. I couldn't process what she was saying. I stared at her, trying to understand. I used to be, well, I used to be someone else," she continued. "I've been transitioning for a while now, but I wanted to tell you before things went any further." My head was spinning. I felt lightheaded, confused, and just kind of trapped. I didn't know what to say. I mean, I've got nothing against people transitioning, but this wasn't exactly something I was expecting. It was like everything I thought I knew about the situation just got flipped upside down. The more I thought about it, the more things started making sense. The deep voice, the way she moved, the awkward little adjustments. I couldn't believe I didn't see it sooner. I'd been on blind dates before, but this was something else. I didn't know what to do or how to feel. Now, don't get me wrong. I wasn't mad at her for transitioning. That's her business. But I felt like I had been deceived. I felt like I had been misled, and I didn't know how to react. I wasn't even sure if I should feel bad for feeling the way I did. I wasn't angry, just incredibly uncomfortable. It wasn't about her being a guy or anything like that. It was about how everything had been built on a lie, whether intentional or not. I didn't stay long after that. I finished my coffee in silence, trying to gather my thoughts. When we said our goodbyes, I didn't know what else to say. I just left. It was probably one of the strangest dates I'd ever been on, and I can't help but think about it every so often. So, yeah, that's my weird blind date horror story. This one's a bit of a roller coaster. I've been debating whether or not to tell this story, but it's something that happened to me a while back, and I've been thinking about it a lot lately. It's just one of those things where everything seemed normal at first, and then it quickly took a very messed up turn. It's one of those situations where you go from being excited for a date to realizing you're stuck in a situation you can't just escape from. It all started with this guy, Paul. We met on one of those dating apps. He seemed pretty normal, nothing out of the ordinary. He had a solid profile with a few pictures, nothing too crazy, just some shots from different trips he'd taken. He seemed like a good catch, and he was funny in our messages. After a couple of weeks of talking, he suggested we meet up for coffee. Seemed chill, right? Like, I wasn't looking for anything serious, just a nice way to spend an afternoon. We agreed to meet at a small cafe downtown. It was one of those cozy, low-key places with mismatched chairs and a bunch of plants hanging from the ceiling. I was early, so I grabbed a seat by the window, scrolling through my phone, getting myself pumped for what I thought would be a nice date. I kept wondering if he'd be as funny in person as he had been in our messages. And to be honest, I was kind of excited. I mean, it was just coffee, right? Nothing to stress over. Then Paul showed up. He was exactly how he looked in his pictures. Tall, dark hair, and wearing a leather jacket. He smiled, came over, and we shook hands. I was pretty sure he seemed just like I imagined he would, chill, down to earth, and approachable. He sat down and we started talking about all the usual first date stuff. Work, hobbies, travel. He seemed pretty laid back and easy to talk to, so things were going well. At first, nothing seemed weird, but after a while, I started to notice a few things, like how he kept checking his phone every few minutes. I didn't think much of it at first. People check their phones all the time. But then I realized he wasn't just checking his phone for random stuff. He was getting messages, and he'd go quiet every time he read one. I could tell something was up, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. After about an hour, he leaned in and said he had to go. He had a few things to handle and that he would see me again soon. It didn't strike me as too odd at the time, but looking back, the vibe was off. He paid for the coffee, thanked me for the date, and walked out. I said goodbye and waved, still feeling like something was weird, but not quite being able to put my finger on it. So, that should have been the end of the story, right? Wrong. Later that evening, I get a text from Paul. He says he had a great time, that he wants to see me again, and that he's looking forward to the next date. I'm thinking, okay, that's normal, and we texted back and forth a bit. He seemed really interested, so I figured, sure, why not? Then the next day, things started to get really weird. I woke up to a text from a random number. At first, I thought it was just a wrong text, but when I looked closer, I saw that it was from Paul's wife. And yeah, that's where things took a real dark turn. She sent me a message that started with, "I know who you are." My stomach dropped. I read the message a few times, trying to make sense of it. She told me that she was Paul's wife and that he had been lying to me. She explained that he'd been doing this for a while, going on dates with other women while they were still together. I felt like I had been hit with a ton of bricks. I didn't know what to do or say, so I just stared at my phone in disbelief for a while. Her messages kept coming in, each one more intense than the last. She was pissed, obviously, but what shook me was how calm and cold she seemed at the same time. She said that Paul had been doing this to multiple women and that she had confronted him about it several times. But here's the part that really got to me. She said she knew everything about me already: my job, where I worked, my social media profiles. She even knew details about my family that I had never shared with Paul. That's when I realized this wasn't just some angry wife venting. This was someone who had been tracking me, watching me, and she wasn't the only one. Apparently, Paul had a whole system for keeping things secret, and I was just one of many. I was in shock. I honestly didn't know what to think. I was furious at Paul, but at the same time, I felt kind of sick. How could someone be so manipulative? How could he lie to me like that? And the worst part, I felt like I was in the middle of a twisted situation that wasn't even mine. I had no idea that I was the other woman. I spent the next few days in a daze trying to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to call him out, but another part of me just wanted to forget everything and block his number. It was hard because the guy seemed so genuine at first, and now I felt completely duped. I didn't even know how to look at the messages from him without feeling disgusted. I tried to reach out to the wife to apologize, but she didn't respond. I didn't blame her, though. How could she trust anyone at that point? I was just the latest in a string of people Paul had lied to. I wasn't angry with her, but I was angry at him for putting both of us in that position. In the end, I blocked his number and removed him from all my social media accounts. I don't know what happened to him after that, whether he kept doing this to other women or if his wife finally put an end to it. But I learned something that day. People can lie in the most convincing ways, and you never really know who you're dealing with until it's too late. I still can't believe how easily I was sucked into that whole mess. A blind date with a guy who was actually married. It's a good reminder to trust your gut and never let someone's charm blind you to the truth.